Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack, back again to bring you the State of Discipline Priest for 9.2. Sorry it took so long. I know it's been a while since I made my Holy Priest video, and I know I said I was going to be a little quicker about that. IRL's been kind of crazy, okay? But most notably, I wanted to get this out before the patch hit, kind of make sure people had a little bit of direction and were able to prepare and have everything they need, and then we'll have a larger, bigger guide, which is going to go a lot more in-depth with some of the ramps and everything to prepare you for when the raid is coming up around the corner. All right, getting into it. Disc, notably, has not really gotten a lot of changes from PTR, besides, of course, the borrow power getting added into it, the double legendaries, the tier set bonuses, and it kind of feels like those tier set bonuses are a bit of a nerf compared to some of the benefits other healers are going to be getting. From Dusk, our 2 set gives you, whenever you cast Shield or Spend, you have a 15% chance to make your next cast of Shadowmen have no cost or cast time. 2 weeks ago, they made it so that this buff would be stackable, and they also gave increased atonement duration by like 1 or 2 seconds for that follow-up Shadowman cast. So now you don't have to worry about like casting a shield or casting a Shadowman or having any sort of weird breakup into your ramp rotation. That would never happen because you're running Clarity of Mind anyway, and you would want those extra duration Rapture shields going out. Quick note on Spirit Shell, I don't think that you're going to be using it in a Mythic progression environment. Maybe the damage is going to be really low in Heroic like Sanctum did, but Mythic is not going to take any prisoners. There's going to be a ton of damage. There's probably going to be a ton of 5 heal fights, as we'll get so much power that will be like 3 or 4 healing at the end of like the expansion and everything like that. Maybe some like 2 heal fights or something like that with how much power grows at the end of expansions. Fully expect for there to be a crazy amount of damage that will eat up your shields in a heartbeat. Because also, we're losing the Shards of Domination intellect bonus, which is really important when you're trying to build big shields with large caps. So from this point forward, we're going to be talking with the assumption that we're going to be playing lots and lots of evangelism. Okay? 4 set bonus. However, kind of cool. Power of the Dark Side increases the effectiveness of penance by an additional 45% and is triggered when Radiance is cast. Now, this is an important bit as well, because a lot of the extra damage you would get out of penance from Power of the Dark Side was sort of random to it. Yeah, if you have the proc and you know you're not going to be able to hold it for your ramp, you just kind of burn it, you just kind of spend it. But now that it's forcibly being procced with your Radiance casts, that guarantees a lot of significant extra damage. Now, unfortunately, it's still split in 2, similar to how the Penitent one works. When you cast Radiance back-to-back, you get 2 stacks of Power of the Dark Side. Same as how, if you get lucky, you get 2 stacks of the Penitent one. If you cast 1 Penance, it consumes 1 charge of the buff. So, naturally, as you can see, we already prepared this. Scrawled Word of Recall is there to help you, where you can get that... I can't believe I'm saying this, but you can get that Penance reset, and you can get that second Penance cast into your ramp window while your atonements are still up. Pretty revolutionary for a trinket that nobody wanted ever. I can't believe it. So if you think about it, you're getting a damage buff for penance by forcibly proccing Power of the Dark Side. Power of the Dark Side's damage is increased from your set bonus. If you were to run Venthyr with a double legendary type of combination, that gives you a large crit strike buff for your penance. And of course, you're already going to have Schism on the target, so that's more damage that you get as well. Notable number 5 is the Penitent one, but we're going to kind of talk about some legendary combinations in a little bit, okay? So this is where the Venthyr conversation, if you guys have been sleeping under a rock, has come from, is that, hey, they buffed a non-covenant damaging ability by a lot, and there's a lot of other things that can make it do a ton of damage. So this would be, I should say, producing as much healing or more healing than the Kyrian setup. Assuming you have double legendaries, right? Because you're having all this synergy that's building off of each other. You have ways to reset it while your atonements are still up, while you have all these resources at hand. And it's right there in front of you. So if you haven't grabbed the Scrawled Word of Recall from the 9, coerce your guildies into running Heroic, Normal, Mythic, whatever, preferably Heroic, Mythic. Make sure they're in healer spec. See if they can get this trinket for you. See if you can get a 9 cash this week for your raid bosses and everything. Try to get that attempt. I think we have this week's vault, next week's vault, and 1 more week afterwards. But try to see whatever you can do to try to get that trinket in the meantime. You don't have to get it immediately, because like I said, I don't really anticipate us using this trinket until we have double legendaries, which is going to be like 4 or 5 weeks from now. So you have time, but just think about it. Similarly, Kyrian and Venthyr Renown should be maxed out at 80, so you don't have to worry about any of that stuff whenever the patch is going to be hitting. Now, like I said, that's for a double legendary combination where I'm really, really hyped up and really high up on Venthyr, and I think it's going to see play probably all the time once those double legendaries start coming into the mix. But before that point, we haven't gotten any class changes. Nothing has fundamentally changed except for the raid encounters that we're going into. So when we start talking about those raid encounters, what do we really start noticing? For a lot of the fights, it reminds me a lot of Nyalotha. There is a lot of consistent damage. There are a lot of phases of stretched or elongated damage, and there's a lot of times where they'll sort of pepper in damage quite frequently, which means having very large, chunky healing at the start of a tier is going to be really important, because there's going to, like I said before, be a lot of 5 heal encounters, because they're anticipating the power level of healers to just massively, massively increase over the course of the 9, 10 plus months. God, I hope it's not going to be like 12 months before we actually end up getting 10.0. So anticipating all of that damage and anticipating similar fights with like 45, 50-ish second timers. A lot of fights kind of reminded me of Remnant in that way, where like, okay, here's going to be a quick burst and everything, and there's naturally some ticking damage happening over the course of a lot of different encounters, but then they're mixing in some burst here and there, some burst here and there, some burst here and there. I do think double Dispriest on Race the World First, on early progression, is just going to be pretty nuts because of how much output you can put into some specific windows. Couple problems are going to be that you're looking to be, like I said, Kyrian again, so you're not having crazy mobility, and it seems like a lot of these encounters want you moving all over the place all the time. There are those windows to ramp, but I've definitely noticed how much I lean on Door of Shadows in particular to kind of help me get out of some problem areas that I don't really anticipate I will have whenever the Race to World First is going to be starting. Maybe there will be some encounters. I know Zymox was particularly annoying when we were going through it on Mythic PTR testing with some of his rings and some of his Halo effects, where having that extra door use could be really, really valuable. But overall, I anticipate us playing a lot of double disc, Kyrian, 1 legendary, because I don't think we're going to get set bonuses as healers for quite a while, especially when they're not as make or break for the spec as some DPSers or certain healers or anything like that. So I very much enjoy some of the different combos I've been able to run as Kyrian. Well, sorry, as Venthyr, I should say. But even when I'm playing as Kyrian, there were actually some fights I noticed which felt pretty good if you had like the Kyrian double legendary, like Clarity of Mind and Sphere's Harmony. But it's kind of relegated to like Dissegni, because it's 2-minute timers for whenever she puts up this Siphon Reservoir, this big absorb that goes off, where it says, oh, hey, if I could have this massive kick-ass ability every 2 minutes, it feels great. But that's very much not most encounters that you'll have there. And even when you're running with something like Venthyr on a 45-second, you could opt to have like your Rapture of Ange used for both of those big ramps and run like a Clarity of Mind setup. But I would also be curious how much you could use the Penitent one. Because I know, like we said, people are really hyped about all the penance damage increase, having Scrawled Word of Recall resets and everything on hand. And so, why not run Penitent? You are going to lose some atonement duration out of your Rapture, which means maybe you're not going to be able to put out as many atonements. But there is one fight which I think is just incredible for the Penitent one and the Venthyr Lego combo, and that was Anduin. And I think Anduin does a great job because half the raid is downstairs at all times, and you need to put in a ton of throughput into your raid to shrink the size of this barrier that players have to stand in together, and it makes such a difference having the additional penance damage. And I was even running Scrawled Word of Recall because I like just got it this week. It took me forever. So I think that there's some interesting things. I like the idea of the Penitent one. I am less convinced on every fight, but like I said, could be wrong on it. So when it comes to farming your renown, make sure you do your Torghast so that you can craft the Penitent one, so that you will be ready to go to have the extra craft for changing over like twins, which I think you will use quite a bit in a Mythic Plus environment. Make sure you get some of that shards and everything or the cinders farmed now. You can also do it from the Jailer's Gauntlet, which is going to be like a new form of Torghast, which I think is a lot more fun, personally. But we won't go too much into that, right? So, looking at a lot of these fights, Dissegni, like I mentioned, has a lot of 2-minute timers. Skolex was a pretty interesting one where he will continuously increase in damage, and one of the mythic mechanics is all of the goo that he's dropping onto the ground, it just stays there forever. So it's a fight of, okay, make sure that we're being as conservative as possible with the space in the room as we can, stacking up as tightly as we can, and making sure that we have enough room all over the place to make sure we're able to survive and not get just AoE'd or just ticked down by any of the puddles that we're creating. It also will have the boss push out increasing stacks of ticking damage until the entire raid stacks and forces him to move. This is one fight where kind of reminded me of Jaina, where there's almost like not that much damage, and oh my god, way too much damage that'll be coming into it. And I think that in like a double disc priest sort of environment, they could be really good just to be able to force the boss to keep on AoEing from a much longer period and a much longer duration. Because you're seeing right here, we have like 10 stacks. We're taking tons of ticking damage. Thankfully, we can still hit the boss, but then he's gonna AoE us again. So the value of that sort of consistency of having the schism and the mind games damage, the penance, the reset, and the penance again, seems like you're just getting constant power punching value. I will say a lot of times I was using Clarity of Mind Venthyr, and I wasn't playing, like I said, Penitent except for Anduin, because I didn't have the scrawled Word of Recall Trinket. So cost benefit on that one is I'm not getting as much duration out of my atonements, but I'm being a lot burstier with them. If you're able to fit all those atonements in that window, it can be super strong, but I am a little bit worried because trying to make some of the other sort of ramp sequences where you have a lot less atonement duration is tough. It is very tough when you're reducing the duration of your atonements. You're moving, you're trying to do mechanics, and you need to go now. So that has a bit of skepticism on my part for it. Like I said, Anduin I think is a shoo-in. Some of these other fights I'm not quite as convinced. So I like the idea of being able to try to mess around with Clarity of Mind, whether it's like splitting the Rapture of Ange. I spent a lot of times where I put them both together and still executed a very similar ramp to what you know from like playing Kyrian. And the nice thing was, because you have the Rapture and Avenge durations added together, you should be able to get that second penance off before the atonements are running out. So you would be running something like Bell. We'll have to see. And like I said, I'll kind of go into some greater depth as to the specific ramps and how I'm going to recommend them, especially once we have like double legendaries coming around the corner as well. But with that, I will summarize it and say, when we have one legendary, Kyrian, very similar to what we already know. When we have double legendary, that's when I think the gates are really going to open up for playing Venthyr. I really like having longer atonement duration, but I do recognize that if you can actually nail those really tight windows out of something like the Penitent one, especially with fights where half the raid is downstairs all the time and you need to do a ton of output on a very low amount of atonements, oh my god, the power that you get out of Penitent one is staggering. All right. With our eyes on M+, we have been doing a ton of different testing for the Encrypted Affix, and I do think that Disc's damage is at a much better level than anything we have been used to from the previous 2 seasons. We are getting some mana savings, like we said previously, out of like our 2-set bonus. Not very significant. The 4-set bonus, forcing the power of the dark sides, is a nice small boost, but what is really quite notable is double legendaries. We're always using Sphere's Harmony. I messed around with the Penitent one and with Twins, the Sun Priestess, in a key environment, and I would argue that most times when I was doing harder keys, I would actually really notice the Penitent one's value, because that would be the areas where everybody in the group's taking damage. I really need something that's going to deal a larger chunk of output whenever I'm trying to deal some damage myself, right? I was playing a lot of Divine Star because Divine Star's damage was buffed in 915, so I'm not having like 5 or 6, 7 Purge the Wicked's getting spread all over the place for any sort of assist, right? So I found a lot of times that it was the Sanguine Depths keys, some of the Tazvesh, because Tazvesh was really heavily overtuned when I was doing it in this video. Those were the areas where I noticed the Penitent one's value. But even if there were like high-level Halls of Atonement runs or something like that, where the damage gets very heavily funneled into the tank, outside of like shards. You know, shards are the only thing that are dealing tons of group-wide damage, and then after that it's like tank pressure, tank pressure, tank pressure. I think that's where I enjoyed running with Twins the Sun Priestess more. And I think in general I would probably only run the Penitent one on like high-level Sanguine Depths, maybe upper Tazvesh or lower Tazvesh, depending on how some of those fights feel. But otherwise, I didn't feel like I was casting Radiance robotically, like on cooldown enough to get a lot of procs, to get a lot of uptime. And I didn't want to like sit there and force Shadow Men casts just to justify the trinket that I'm running, or the legendary that I'm running. That makes sense? Let me know in the comments down below. I liked how the spec worked. I think if you were going to look at Season 2 and how Disc matched up, you would kind of see Shaman, Paladin at this really, really high tier point, and then sort of a desert. I would describe it as a desert, where if those two were up in S tier, A tier had nobody, and then there were a bunch of B tier healers, right? And Disc was one of them. Disc, like a lot of the others, falls off a cliff when you get into like 24, 25, 26, 27. There's a handful of people that are doing it at that level, and it just drops off, and all you see is Paladin and Shaman. My prediction for next season is that that desert is gone. I think double legendaries, nerfs to holy paladins, the buffs that a lot of the specs like Holy Priest or Rested Druid are getting, props up many of them, destroys that sort of desert in the A tier, and it kind of makes Shaman at the top as God, bunch of A tier healers, and then like Mistweaver, unfortunately, because Mistweaver just does not do good damage at all. The Encrypted Affix, just to summarize it up really quickly, there are 3. One of them gives you speed, damage reduction, and stealth. Another one gives you haste, and another one gives you cooldown reduction. The cooldown reduction was bugged, so that it was giving you more cooldown reduction for your Covenant abilities than it was for regular abilities. But even when they fix that, it still allows you to have Mind Blast, or say, have Boon of the Ascended activated, and then your Ascended Blast is going to proc every single time, or it allow the cooldown will get so reduced that you can cast it every single global. And you see, this is what I'm like waiting to do, but unfortunately they bugged out the relics here. But you would basically be able to proc your Boon of the Ascended and then blast, 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 blast. You wouldn't have the largest Ascended Eruption possible, but you would be able to produce so much atonement healing, especially when a lot of the damage is going on to the tank. Speaking of tank damage, before mine dies, it's good to note that generally, if they don't get destroyed by the mechanics, tanks are super stable. In particular, that line. Let's see if I can try it again here. In particular, tanks are super, super stable now, and they take a lot less damage. The set bonuses are very, very powerful. They're very good, and all of those things make it so much less stressful for the Disc Priest, because one of the other problems is certain tanks, you would just have to put in a lot of output. You'd have to put in a ton of healing into them, and it would drain your mana. You would just be so going back to back to back trash pulls on like Halls of Atonement because your tanks are getting rocked. Now, set bonuses, tanks are gods, double legendaries, tanks are gods. It makes it so much easier to be able to sustain them, and a lot of tanks, notably like Brewmaster, that required a ton of healing, are much, much easier to tolerate as long as they do the mechanics properly, so I'll say that. So that's a really big boon for the spec. The double legendary is a very big boon for the spec, and the fact that you don't really have to spam the tanks as much. I think all of the dungeons get a lot easier when it comes to dealing with these relics. They're very frequent, quick buffs that you're having on hand all the time, and I think that very solidly puts Disc on a similar tier for an M+ environment with Holy Pally, Holy Priest, and Rested Druid. Yes. Nailed it. So, things are looking up for the spec, I would argue. Still being really good in raids, still being in very, very high demand for a raid environment, and being able to be a lot better in keys. Not much more that you can be asking for there. Let me know what you guys think. If you have any other questions, I am in the process of updating my Wowhead guides, so this weekend they should have the first round of updates talking about all of this stuff in a lot greater detail. Sorry there was a lot of ranting, but I think there's still a lot of opportunity to figure out some of the specific combos of the double legendaries and how you want to start playing out some of the different fights. Oh, last thing on Trinkets, I forgot to mention, the new Instructor's Divine Bells in 9.2 are getting nerfed. So if you don't have a 213 one right now, go spam switch back and forth between Kyrian and whatever other Covenant until your table mission switches over to give you a bell. Do that now, because the new bells, last I checked, the new bells are reduced, they're nerfed in strength, but they didn't change the current ones. If they change that on PTR, I'll let you guys know in Discord. Link is going to be in the description below. But that's it for me. Let me know if you have any questions. Sorry, this is a little bit ranty and rushed, but we'll be having a lot more polished of a video. A very pretty video coming up for 9.2 just before the raid drops, all right? Thanks so much for watching, guys. Hope you all enjoyed it. I'll catch you all next time.